If you've been to a public event in Seattle, you've most likely seen, or better yet heard, these megaphone preachers.
Rather than speaking righteous, well, you need one who would live for you.
A post on Reddit is asking if what they're doing is even legal. So Fox 13's AJ Janavel went out today to get some answers.
To God, Jesus, our Lord, He who has the Son has.
Yeah, they're really annoying.
Have not lived and died for you, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ. There's one going.
I think this in public is ridiculous. People are just trying to go to the game.
Flee from the wrath to come.
It seems pretty obvious how baseball fans feel about the preachers outside T-Mobile Park.
They're really, really loud, and they're not achieving anything because nobody's listening. It's just upsetting to hear the yelling.
Well, hi, my name is Jeff. I'm part of the teaching team here at Rainier Christian Church, and I wonder how you feel thinking about that experience. For many of us, that emotion that comes to the surface might be one of anger, might be one of frustration, might be one of disappointment, or just mere annoyance thinking about somebody shouting through a bullhorn at 120 decibels when you're going to enjoy a baseball game. Now, the feelings that you have tell us something about what's going on here. That it's not the message that's the problem, it's the method and the messenger that is the problem here in this situation. Because yes, it's obnoxious, but the real problem is that this guy's going about doing things in a way that's completely unlike Jesus. Because what does the Bible say about the way Jesus comes to us, interacts with us? This is what it says in the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And so the Bible describes Jesus as relational, dwelling with us, knowing the names of the people that he walked alongside, seeing their needs, their hurts, their pains, having compassion. This is what's missing in just a one-way screaming at you or dumping of communication towards others that Jesus doesn't model. He models a completely incarnational, with us in the flesh kind of way of living. And so in our world today, when we think about the series we're in, everyONE, that we want each and every one of you, if you call Rainier Christian Church your church home, man, who's the one person that one day you want to see walk in with you? And what would change if that happened? And so thinking about that, right, the way to engage people today is not to try and convince them with your superior arguments, okay? Think about this. When's the last time a stranger walked down the street or you're walking the aisle of a store and they stop you and they say, hey, give me your deep-seated belief about something. Now, let me tell you why my logic is superior and yours is inferior. And then you responded with, oh my gosh, I'm ready to give up that deeply held belief because your logic is superior to mine. Right? No, that never happens. And then you migrate this to social media or online, and it's just 10 times worse. Right? All you have happening in that space is that people are just posting their statements. They're not looking for dialogue. They're not looking for relationship. They're just looking to be the last person to post, so they think they won the argument. Right? It's why I actually don't engage with really engaging anything online in terms of a discussion. I do that in real life with real humans, face to face, or at least over a phone call or a video call. Why? Right? Because just shouting or putting my information out there doesn't change anything. And so what is the world looking for really today? It's looking for somebody who would truly listen. Listening actually is probably the best evangelism strategy that we have. And so regardless of where you're at with faith, what would it look like if we just learn to listen to one another better? That's really what we want to look at today, because we know that sharing faith shouldn't start with a megaphone at 120 decibels, right? We know that. But the question remains, how do I share then? Like, what does it look like for me to share well? And so maybe you don't share because you think that sharing is something in terms of faith, that's something for somebody else to do. That's for the professionals. It's not for you. Maybe you think you're too old or you're too young to share your faith with somebody else. Maybe you're intimidated that you're just not mature enough in your faith. You don't know what you would say if somebody raised a question that you don't know how to answer. You're afraid of answering the wrong way, and then that's on you. And then so you don't want to be responsible, so you just don't say anything at all. Maybe you're worried that there's going to be distance in the relationship if you choose to talk about and share why your faith matters with somebody else. We've got many reasons that we do that. But at the top of this message today, I want you to know this, that God does not hold us responsible for the outcomes. He just wants you and I to be faithful witnesses. That means we just represent what we know about who Jesus is to the best of our abilities, and that's all that God asks of those of us who are following in the way of Jesus. He does not expect us to be experts. He doesn't expect us to have a perfect answer to every question, okay? And so the whole point of this series, and really this year-long initiative of everyONE, is that we would feel confident in our abilities to naturally share our faith, naturally invite others in the course of our ordinary everyday lives to come join us one day at church to share about why our faith matters so much to us. And so here's something that you need to know that I hope is actually an encouragement to you. Someone else needs you to be Jesus to them. There's someone else who needs you to be Jesus to them. Well, how are we like Jesus? Okay, not by walking on water, okay, but emulating the way of Jesus that we can. As I read in that verse at the top, John 1, verse 14, that we can be people of grace and truth. We can walk alongside others the way Jesus does. And so turn with me to John chapter 3, a couple chapters over. I want to look at an example of an encounter Jesus has with an unlikely individual. That somebody who's from the religious establishment, somebody who's well-respected, who wouldn't typically be seen with Jesus. Jesus would kind of be below him, and yet he seeks Jesus out. And I want us to look at how does Jesus respond to this man, Nicodemus, in a way that he's seen, valued, and really meets him where he's at. So John 3, beginning in the first couple of verses there. Now there was a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him." Now, even though Nicodemus maybe has higher social standing, he sees there's something going on with Jesus that's bigger than me, that's beyond me. And he's curious and he leans in. But what I love is that Jesus doesn't say, "Oh, come meet me on my level." Jesus actually accommodates Nicodemus because it would have been unseemly, it would have been dangerous for Nicodemus' social status to be seen maybe having time alone with Jesus. And so what does Jesus do? He meets him at midnight. Jesus doesn't say, "Hey, bro, come meet me at the temple at noon in the daytime like a man." Right? No, he doesn't say that. He says, "Okay, like I'll meet you where you're comfortable meeting." He doesn't make Nicodemus feel embarrassed to meet him where he's comfortable. Jesus goes to some great lengths to meet Nicodemus where he's at. Because again, nighttime is the time to do things that you don't want to be seen doing in daylight. Right? It's why when people on their ring.com accounts, right, they're posting porch prowlers and car thieves, right? 2 to 4 a.m., right? That's when most of that's going on. Yes, there are some brazen thieves that do it in broad daylight, but most aren't that dumb. And so Jesus accommodates Nicodemus to meet him at the time and the place that's comfortable for him. And we see Jesus responding accordingly to that. Jesus goes to great lengths to first listen to Nicodemus and then respond. He listens and then he responds. And so this is important, so important. Let me say it again. Jesus listens and then responds. He doesn't cut him off mid-sentence. He's not queuing up his argument. He's starting with fully engaging and listening to Nicodemus. Now again, we live in such a world of one-way communication, one-way posting of my thought, one way of here's what I think. And again, we've lost a lot of the ability to sit down at a table, hold different beliefs from another, share what we believe, and yet still have a relationship together. And so this compounds when we have a lack of relationship, but yet we're just talking all the time. And so here's what I know. Here's what I know about relationships, and it's this. Anyone who truly values a relationship with someone else and is willing to listen will always have an opportunity to be heard. Let me say it again. Anyone who truly values a relationship with someone else and is willing to listen first will always end up with an opportunity to be heard. Keeping this front and center in our minds, let's go on to see how a little bit more of this encounter with Nicodemus and how it informs how we ought to respond to our neighbor around us. Passage goes on, John 3, verse 3. Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." "How can someone be born again when they're old?" Nicodemus asked. "Surely they cannot enter a second time into their mother's womb to be born." Note here, look back at this passage. Jesus' effort to hear out Nicodemus leads to further discussion. We're not going to go on any further in the passage because there's a lot of rabbit trails that we don't have time to explore in this message. But I share this part, this small slice, to just remind us of Jesus' model of meeting people where they're at, listening first before responding. And that's really the next step in our everyONE series. We started with this blessed principle, beginning with prayer, having 8 people that you write down that are neighbors, that are close to you in some sphere of your life, your literal neighborhood, your workplace, classmates, teammates, wherever, just praying for opportunities to bless them, to get to know them. But then the next step is to look to listen. Let me tell you a story that'll kind of help with this and the power of listening. Several years back, we went on a trip to camp at Yellowstone, and I don't like driving, kind of 10, 12 hours a day and then setting up camp. We still, at this point in time, still tent camping, and so we got a whole kit and all that and stuff, and so, I don't want to drive all day and then do it. So we stopped at a hotel, kind of a few hours away from the park that first night, and so that first night, when I go back out to the car the next morning, we had a soft-sided roof carrier at the time, and somebody had broken into it, and they'd rummaged through it, and there were just a few things, nothing of great value that was missing, but a few sleeping bags that were missing, and so it was really frustrating to wake up, and then I gotta clean up after that, gauge what's been taken, run to Walmart, get a few items, right, get ready to go, and so I go to the counter, I just let them know what's happened, I'm obviously grumpy about it. I'm not thrilled about it, but I wasn't looking for the hotel to do anything about it. Like, what are they going to do, right? And so they're, of course, at the front. They're so sorry. But then something changed. See, I got an email shortly after this happened from the manager of this one hotel. Let's just say this chain is Milton, okay? Milton Hotels. And so the manager, I can still tell you her name to this day, Julie O'Brien, writes back. And she waives that one night of room charges. She is so empathetic in her response. I could tell it wasn't ChatGPT, it wasn't canned. It was her heart to empathize with, this happened, and she just wishes she could do more to change it, right? Now, what did that cost her? It didn't really cost her much. In the scheme of things, for the Milton brand of hotels, it didn't cost them a whole heck of a lot, but what it did is it radically changed the way I thought about their whole organization. And to this day, I can still remember the manager who wrote me back, Julie O'Brien. Everything changed for me because somebody took the time to see my need, to see my misfortune in that moment, and respond with empathy. What might happen for us as Christians, if we're followers of Jesus, if we engage the other people, our everyone's, the 8 people that we want to see walk in one day with us, and narrowing down, having that one person in mind? What might change if we had that attitude and that viewpoint? And so that's why we begin by praying, but then the very next thing we want you to do is not launch into a sales pitch, not give the top 10 arguments for why your neighbor is wrong. Nope, not doing that. The next thing to do is to listen. And again, that might feel scary for us because we just feel like we're everyday, ordinary people. How could we possibly do this? And so I want to read another encouraging set of verses to you. If you want to, hop over to Luke chapter 10 because we're going to see that Jesus uses ordinary, everyday people to accomplish his audacious goal for the good news, the gospel, to go to every corner of the world. We say here that version of that for us is that we want to reach every neighborhood in Pierce County, to See every neighborhood engaged by believers to be transformed by Jesus. And Jesus always has entrusted this in the hands of everyday ordinary people. Luke 10 tells us of this. Beginning in verse 1, it says, "After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. He told them, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field.'" Now, I love, if you're familiar with the Bible, there's a lot about Jesus and his 12 disciples, right? And so you could think that that's the only people that he interacts with. But this gives us a very important insight. There was a much larger group of people that were engaging with Jesus' ministry, following him around. And so he deputizes 72 of them to go out and do the things that he was doing, preach the message that he was preaching. And incredible things happen because they're trusting in the power that Jesus gives them. Now, they see incredible healings and incredible spiritual things happening. We may not, but the one thing that is consistent, the one thing that is timeless from that passage is this, that the harvest is plentiful, meaning there are so many people hungry for more in their lives, wanting something more than they have, better answers to the meaning and purpose of life, that we claim to possess as followers of Jesus. And that says what? But the workers are few. And the workers are few, I think, sometimes because the weight feels so big. The job feels so big. And so what's the work we're inviting you to do? It starts with, again, your 8, listing out your 8. Begin praying for opportunities. And then the next piece of work is simply to look to listen. And so we're not going to be motivated to pursue this work wholeheartedly without a clear vision that that it's central, that it's core to following the way of Jesus. One of my favorite verses is Mark 10:45, which speaks to this. "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life away as a ransom for many." One of the best ways I am convinced to serve others in our context today, in our culture today, is look to build relationship and look to listen first. This is the greatest way that you and I can serve. One author counted up in the Gospels all of the questions that Jesus asked. And he found 307 questions that Jesus asks. He also noted that there were only 3 times that Jesus follows up with a statement, right? At least for me, I don't know about you, but I have a long way to go to become more like Jesus. Now, in part, why serving others starts with listening, I believe, is because we live in such a relationally isolated, divided, distracted world, in part because of our smartphones and our screens and all those things clamoring for our attention all the time. If there's one book you read this year, make it Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. Why do I say that? I mean, outside of the Bible, you should be reading that every day. But if there's one other book you're going to read this one. Why? Because we need to be aware, we need to understand all of the data and research out there that points to the reality of the rapid increase in depression, anxiety, social isolation that has been going on for decades now, but really took off in a huge way around 2010. What happened in 2010? The smartphone and social media got paired together, and the results have been bad for relationships, especially for teenagers, especially for young people. It affects all of us. But let me just show you a couple graphs, a pair of graphs from this research that show the drift away from relationships that's been going on for a couple decades now. And you can see the rapid decline in the amount of time that people get to engage in friendships. And so this ought to be sobering to us. But also, what might it look like for us to minister to an anxious, a relationally starved, a depressed generation that's craving relationships but not finding them? What would it look like if we lived like Jesus and led with an empathetic, relationship-first response, an extension of that to the world around us, starting with listening? If you've been around Rainier View for some time, you've heard me share. I didn't grow up going to church. In my freshman year of high school, I started having lunch with some friends that I knew from middle school, some new friends. A lot of them went to the same youth group every Tuesday night. And so they started inviting me because somebody told them that's what Christians should do, right? Good job. And did I respond the first week? Sure. No. I made up every excuse in the book not to go to youth group for months and months and months. When Monday rolled around, Tuesday, they would invite me every week because youth group was on Tuesday. I'd make up an excuse. Finally, because they're my friends, I decided, I'm going to go once to get them off my back. And then I went, and I kept going. Why? For a very spiritual reason? No. I enjoyed playing pickup basketball with my friends before youth group. That was the reason that I kept going. Why? But look at that. There's relationship, right? My friends knew at some level that there was a responsibility and opportunity to invite someone else and to continue to do that. But there was a basis of relationship there first, that they knew me, we spent time together, we were friends. And so when I was ready to respond to the invitation, I was able to, and obviously clearly it worked, it stuck. I'm serving in the church today. And so who do you need to care about before you even open your mouth about Jesus to them? Okay? Because someone needs you to be Jesus to them. Someone doesn't need you to be an expert lawyer on behalf of Christendom to them. Someone needs you to be Jesus to them. And it's not that God needs you, by the way, but he, in the mystery of how he works, he wants and allows us to participate in his mission, in his work of bringing people back into a knowledge of him, in a relationship with him. We get the privilege of being part of that if we are willing to trust God and do that. So what an amazing opportunity to take hold of. And so will you and I encourage one another? That word, encourage, give courage to. Can we encourage one another in that work of stepping out in that mission, carrying out what it looks like for us to be like Jesus to somebody else? It starts with listening. And so we've prepared a very simple resource, just a handful of questions for you to ask yourself, to evaluate yourself in order to see how can I be a better listener to those that I want to be intentional about inviting. What might that look like for me? And again, as the top of the series, we talked about this. We have an audacious goal, an audacious vision as a church to reach every neighborhood in Pierce County, to see every neighborhood engaged by believers to be transformed by Jesus. But an audacious vision or goal demands two things, assessment and action. And so we're starting with assessment. We're assessing our own hearts and minds. We're seeing, God, is my heart like yours towards those that are not here yet? Can I be like you towards them? What does that look like for me? And for most of us, it's a lot simpler and a lot easier than we think it is. Begin with listening. So glad that you joined us, and we want to make sure to come back each and every week of everyONE. Catch all of these. It's all going to build together. And we know that Pierce County will end up looking different if we all pursue our 8. We look to bless. We're going to see people walk in that we thought would never darken the doors of our church, whose life might be changed because we look to take these simple steps together. Hope to see you back here next week.